Welcome back to more FPL content. This will be the team selection for Game Week 7. I've only got one free transfer and it was quite a chaotic and rollercoaster of a week, of course, that just went by. I'll be reviewing it to begin with, discussing price changes, also my transfer plans for future game weeks, and a few different ideas to go against the template and grain and build something a bit differential to keep on rising up the mini leagues and rankings. You can see my FPL challenge squad, which is also a little bit unique, with Nick Pope in goal facing Nottingham Forest at home, Gabriel and Gay in that defence, with Phil Foden as my captain. He has a brilliant record against Brentford with 7 goals in 7 matches against them, and he's the only Man City player to have scored at the GTEC Community Stadium, and I think he could be a great option for the captaincy, and it's a bit of a shame I didn't buy him in the previous deadline. Antoine Semenyo would complete the midfield, and Ollie Watkins, who I sold in Game Week 6, would be up front facing Burnley at home. You can only pick one player per club in FPL Challenge, and this week it is called Zero to Hero. Any defenders, goalkeepers and midfielders will score double the number of points for a clean sheet, and that's why I've only got one forward and no Erling Haaland in this setup. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content for both FPL and user fantasy coverage, and that will resume, of course, after the international break. And a big shout out, of course, to all the members, patrons and subscribers. You're massively appreciated. We're closing in on new goals like 37 fast subscribers, and be sure to tune into the deadline stream on Friday where I'll lock in my FPL challenge and FPL squads by that deadline. Also check the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships, fair access to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. I made 2 transfers for a -4 here in Game Week 6, and the results were certainly mixed to say the least. And between the sticks, it was the same old story with my goalkeeper. Robert Sanchez might have kept the clean sheet against Benfica in the Champions League, but Chelsea got a red card there with Joao Pedro towards the end of that game. And guess what? In the last 2 Premier League matches, the same story. Sanchez sent off against Man United back in Game Week 5. He served a 1-game ban in the Carabao Cup against Lincoln. And in the case of Chalobah, he cost Chelsea because they were 1-0 up. And in the second half, he was sent off for a professional last man foul, just like Robert Sanchez. He will now miss Game Week 7 against Liverpool, and his return will be in Game Week 8 facing Nottingham Forest after the international break. So I think Sanchez might have kept 1 clean sheet out of the last 2 games if Chelsea had 11 men, but Chelsea have to really look at themselves here because defensively they are looking very shaky. They are keeping most of their clean sheets, in fact all of them, in home matches, but they still always look like they could concede a goal out of nothing, and they do make some big mistakes at the back. I've always said this from the beginning. This is why I don't think they'll challenge for a league title or for the big trophies, because they just have such a weak defensive line. They need to invest in that position after spending over £1 billion over the last couple of years. In my defensive line, I had Pedro Porro, Konsa and Gabriel, who scored the winning goal against Newcastle, and he was at fault for Voltemader's goal, but he made up for it. He typically does this over the years whenever he commits a critical error, and he also scored DEFCON. So I think Gabriel is one of the very best defenders in FPL, because for this price tag, you'll get clean sheets on multiple occasions, probably over 30 starts in the Premier League, I think it's fair to say. It could even be up to 35 if he can stay fit. And he's got the best goal scoring potential of any Arsenal defender. And you add that to DEFCON, and you've got a complete package in this defensive line. As for Ezri Konsa, I thought a clean sheet was possible against Fulham. They conceded quite early on, but made the comeback, and ultimately he was the Villa player I should have sold in theory. But I always prefer to make transfers in my attacking positions, and ultimately selling Watkins still paid off big time, but Konsa is just not worth the money. There could be a clean sheet against Burnley, so he's not a sell right now, but going into Game Week 8, I would be very happy to see the back of him and not invest in any Aston Villa players for the foreseeable future. Pedro Porro was benched on Saturday night against Wolves. I was going live with that reaction stream during the game, and he got 1 point in the second half, which was expected. He got an assist against Bodo Glimt in the Champions League and was booked, and I picked Van der Ven in UCL Fantasy just over him. It was a very close call there, and Van der Ven was the one who scored, and they eventually made the comeback to draw 2-2. But Spurs have been shaky in recent matches. They were 2-0 down against Brighton, made the comeback. They dropped points against bottom of the league Wolves, but they still have a good platform to build on, because I think Thomas Frank has done a good job so far. They're much better from set pieces. They look more solid defensively, but at times they really struggle with creativity and breaking through the line. So they do have a balance issue in the midfield, but the Spaniard remains a decent FPL option, especially against Leeds away. Afterwards, he could become a sell, and that'll be discussed in future podcasts, but At a similar price tag, you have Crystal Palace defenders like Mark Gay and Daniel Munoz. Lacroix would also be decent. Tarkovsky will offer defcon in most matches. Marcus Senesi is the standout defender right now. Gabriel and other Arsenal defenders like Timber would also stand out, but I think Ben White could also eat into Timber's minutes, and there could be a bit of rotation if Ben White can stay fit. Saliba would be the alternative. He was benched against Newcastle and came on at half-time, and he would be first choice alongside Gabriel. That goes without saying, and I just think Arsenal have that sort of squad depth to maybe give the likes of Gabriel rest on the odd occasion. But with Pedro Porro, he will start most games for Tottenham Hotspur. That was kind of an opportunity to rest him, and I discussed that as a possibility going into the Game Week 6 deadline. So I'm happy to keep him for now, but going into Game Week 8 to 10, he would become a sell. And especially if I deploy the wild card by Game Week 8, Pedro Porro wouldn't be anywhere near that sort of setup. In the midfield, I've got Bruno Fernandes, unfortunately, missing that penalty and producing -1 points. I sold Salah to Bruno Fernandes, and that was to fund a huge move up front, which ultimately paid off. Otherwise, it would have been a disastrous week for me, to say the least. Reinders blanked, and despite getting that return from him against Wolves in Game Week 1, I've been a bit frustrated by him because I showed a lot of faith in him, starting him against Brighton over and die. That turned out to be a mistake. I benched him against Arsenal. He got the assist, defcon, and 9 points. And then against Burnley at home, he blanks in a massive Man City victory. So did Phil Foden, to be fair. It was Doku who was the standout midfielder from an FPL perspective. Erling Haaland stole the show up front, but Reinders can be quite difficult to predict when it comes to his FPL returns. Unlike Semenyo, who's been very consistent this season, I was always quite frustrated by him in the previous campaign because I would start him in easier fixtures, he would blank, and then bench him in the so-called tougher games, and he would return quite consistently there. So Semenyo's gone up to another level this season. He's potentially on penalties when Justin Kluivert isn't on the pitch. We saw that against Brighton a couple of weeks ago. His ceiling is extremely high. He can get goals and assists on a regular basis. He's getting a lot of big chances. The shot volume is always incredible, and he got that opening goal against Leeds in that 2-2 draw. And Ndiaye is still a consistent performer. So despite the blank against West Ham, I still expected the Hammers to produce a decent response with their new manager, Nuno Espirito Santo, and that could be a problem for Arsenal assets going into Game Week 7 as well. But Ndiaye is off the back of back-to-back DEFCON returns. He also got the assist against Liverpool, so he's got a bit of credit in the bank for me anyway. He's not necessarily a must-have on a wild card, but he's a solid option in the midfield, and it's quite rare to have this consistent performer. Apart from Semenyo, Ismaila Sarr, and maybe Bukayo Saka, I think it's quite difficult to find that consistency in the midfield, and Saka hasn't done it so far this season. I believe he will do so from Game Week 7 onwards as a massive differential. Mohamed Salah goes without saying. He is still a great choice, but he's not worth 14.5 million, and he is nowhere near the level he showed last season. Then you've got Moises Caicedo for defensive contributions. Enzo Fernandez is quite appealing at around 6.7 million, and I'll discuss even more options in this position in my best wildcard squad, which is coming very soon. It'll be a double upload on Thursday with this team selection and the wildcard squad, and on Friday, of course, there is the deadline stream where I'll be answering hundreds of your questions. Up front, I had this traditional front three, you could say, of Joao Pedro, Erling Haaland and Chris Wood, who absolutely stunk out the gaff. Joao Pedro has credit in the bank because he returned so well in the first 3 game weeks. Chris Wood, though, he scored a brace against Brentford in the opening game week of the season, and he has blanked in every other match. He's being subbed off early under Ange Postecoglou, and Igor Jesus will start eventually. It could even happen this weekend against Newcastle, so I'm very concerned about Chris Wood. And one of my mistakes in game week 6 was selling Watkins instead of Wood. And if I had kept Watkins, I could have then bought Phil Foden instead of Bruno Fernandes, not have that penalty miss, and I'm really bullish on Phil Foden against Brentford away. But the saving grace and silver lining is that I bought Erling Haaland and triple captain him. I was bullish on that from the beginning of the season. In my chip strategy guide, I discussed this as a real possibility, and in my recent streams and videos, I was pushing for this all day long, you could say, over the wild card. And of course, for some people, they needed to use the chip. I understand that, but I think some people maybe had some misperceptions or misguided interpretations of their own team, and I think Erling Haaland triple captaincy was the way to go, and wildcarding in game week 8 or 13 looks even better in the long term. He left it late. it looked like only one assist, and that would have been a very disappointing triple captaincy, even though we have another one for the second half of the season. But those 2 late goals saved it, so it was a great decision, with some luck along the way, of course, with the nature of the goals. But Erling Haaland can score at any given moment, and against Burnley, there were so many plus points and ticks, and thankfully it paid off. It's always refreshing and also rewarding when a good decision does pay off. That doesn't always happen in FPL. On my bench, there was only one regret, not starting Lacroix, maybe over Bedroboro or Konsa, but ultimately he got 4 points. He conceded to Liverpool late on. I would argue the goal shouldn't have stood, and that would have been an even bigger return from the Frenchman on my bench. Reinildo Mandava remains suspended, and it's Alderete, who has now gone up to 4.1 million in price, who is the standout Sunderland defender. I also like Mukiele for the DEFCON potential. And first on my bench was Cody Gakpo, who wasn't a starter against Crystal Palace, and he got the nod against Galatasaray in the Champions League, played fairly well, but going into this weekend against Chelsea, there is no guarantee that Cody Gakpo will start. Before that Champions League match, where I think he had a good performance, he wasn't playing particularly well, and a lot of Liverpool fans raised that point across my videos. Dubravka was also on my bench. He got 1 point, so no difference this time round, unlike the 7-point swing that happened back in Gameweek 5. So in terms of my rank, I essentially halved it, and it was all thanks to 3 people. Erling Haaland as my triple captain was the main game changer, and Gabriel's late goal against Newcastle was a great moment. Of course, as an Arsenal fan, that's going to be the moment of the weekend for me. And Antoine Semenyo is so consistent. I'm very happy with him, and I can put aside what happened last season in terms of benching him at the wrong time and say, you know what, we've moved past that, and Semenyo is the best midfielder in FPL right now. I can't say the same about Ollie Watkins. I knew he would score the moment I sold him, and I do have a slight regret about not selling Chris Wood instead, but we'll get to that going into Gameweek 7. Before I talk about my transfer plans though, let's discuss some price changes and what's happened very recently. So Robert Sanchez costs 4.9 million now, which can make it a bit difficult for some people to go to David Raya or Donnarumma, who costs 5.6 million. Bedroboro has that price tag, but that could fall fairly soon, and Ezri Konsa is still 4.5, but not for much longer, especially after the Burnley game. Gabriel, though, has risen up in price several times over the last couple of weeks. He is now 6.2 million, and I think that goal against Newcastle sealed that price rise, which seemed to be on the verge or on the cusp for such a long time, and it finally happened. Bruno Fernandes cost 9 million. That could change to 8.9 after the Sunderland game, because then it's Liverpool after the international break. Reinders is 5.8 now, so he has been a bit of a yo-yo when it comes to transfer activity, and Semenyo has gone up in price so many times now. He is 7.8. Maybe by the next team selection he'll be 7.9. He is still worth the investment, even though some great fixtures have passed him by, and Indai is 6.5 million. Joao Pedro is 7.8, but people are selling him, and if you want to go differential in this position, I do like Nick Voltemada for Gameweek 7. The long-term Jared Bowen is such a consistent performer and a talismanic figure for West Ham. He has 9 bonus points this season, and even against Arsenal, he could produce the goods as he did last season. Erling Haaland is 14.4, soon to be 14.5 in my opinion, and the shift from Salah to Haaland is quite clear, and Chris Wood could go down yet again to 7.4. He has been one of my worst transfers this season, which is the complete opposite of last season when I started with Chris Wood in Gameweek 1. He was one of my biggest differentials, and I got off to a fantastic start with Erling Haaland triple captain in Gameweek 2, scoring a hat-trick. So a few similar themes here, but this time round it hasn't worked with Chris Wood. On my bench, Dubravka and Reinildo still cost 4 million, and Reinildo Mandava will be available on the 25th of October after the international break. Gakpo is 7.6, that could fall very soon again, and also Lacroix is 5.1 million, and he remains a decent option in the long term with DEFCON potential. Crystal Palace are one of the best sides in England right now. They're still unbeaten. In fact, they're the only English team to be unbeaten, and across Europe's top 5 leagues, they have the longest unbeaten streak of any club, which is extremely impressive to say the least, with 18 overall. But in terms of transfer plans to bolster my squad for Gameweek 7, I am considering Bruno Fernandes to Foden because I'm so bullish on Foden. He might even be number 1 in my captaincy ranking, which might seem crazy, but I read out the stats earlier in the FPL challenge section at the beginning of this video. 7 goals in 7 games against Brentford. He scored a hat-trick at that stadium a few years ago. I realise he's not the same player he once was, but I think in recent weeks he has shown something with goals and assists against Napoli, Manchester United, and showing a bit of consistency. He was quite disappointing against Burnley and Arsenal, but you can give him the benefit of the doubt, and in midweek he did score and assist against Huddersfield. So that was last week at the time of this video, but Foden does warrant that 8.1 million investment. He's not my favourite midfielder. I think Semenyo would be the standout, but I think Foden can complement him in the midfield on a wild card or using a free transfer. Now, the other transfer I'm looking at is Chris Wood to Voltemada. They're both facing each other. I think Chris Wood could be benched this weekend, and Voltemada could score or assist. Now, a lot will depend on Newcastle's lineup in the Champions League, so by the time this video is published, we will know the Newcastle result, how they've played, and if Nick Voltemada plays 90 minutes, that could all have a bearing on the weekend. But my long-term kind of dream in the forward line might surprise you, but Jarrod Bowen is really piquing my interest, especially in Game Week 8. I'll be talking about this later on in the FPL.team section, visualizing future game weeks and talking about a differential route in the midfield and forward line. But Voltemada is yet another low-owned player who scored against Arsenal and Wolves, so in both home matches he has played in, and only the one blank against Bournemouth in a goalless draw, but he looks really impressive. He's by far my favourite Newcastle attacker. This could be a problem when Visser's back. After the international break, we could see some rotation. Of course, in the Champions League, Voltemada was benched and Anthony Gordon played up front, so that is something that we should be quite mindful about in the future. But I do like him a lot as a one-week punt, and if I do wildcard in 8, it makes sense to go for someone I really believe in to do the goods in Game Week 7. That's where Voltemada and Phil Foden could come in, even as part of another -4 hit. But I think with their points potential this weekend, it could be worth it, and I think I can wildcard shortly afterwards. So with all of that in mind, this is my provisional team selection for Game Week 7. I am looking at Dubravka in goal, facing Aston Villa away. I don't think Burnley will keep a clean sheet, neither will Chelsea against Liverpool, in my opinion, and both Liverpool and Chelsea are missing crucial players, so that is a big shame, of course, when you see such a high-quality game on paper and you see some of the best players missing out. And in the case of Dubravka, I would have been more confident if it was a home fixture, but Aston Villa found their groove in the second half against Fulham when Buendia was subbed on, and he was the quickest substitute in Premier League history to score an assist off the bench within the matter of 2 minutes. That was a great performance by him, but Dubravka has better saves potential than Sanchez. I would argue that Chelsea might concede fewer goals this weekend, but ultimately both of them won't keep a clean sheet, and it comes down to the saves, and I think Dubravka has the edge in that regard. Going into my defensive line, I'm considering a back four with Pedro Porro, Lacroix, Konsa, and Gabriel, and I will likely go for this setup if I don't make a transfer in the midfield and forward line. So Porro is facing Leeds away. There is a chance of a clean sheet there, but Spurs have been quite shaky in recent matches. Lacroix is facing Everton away, and I think the Eagles have struggled against the Toffees in recent seasons, so that isn't kind of like a give-me fixture, and they could actually struggle more than they did against Liverpool last week. Konsa's facing Burnley at home. They are right up there in the clean sheet odds, which I'll show you towards the end of this video, but Aston Villa can't be relied upon defensively. I think they've been solid in that regard, but they're still conceding a goal or two in every single game. And Gabriel is facing West Ham. Arsenal are topping the clean sheet odds by some distance with a 57% chance of a clean sheet, according to the website fantasyfootballpundit.com. Gabriel can score a goal. He's done it before against West Ham, and he has scored so many crucial goals for the Gunners over the years. DEFCON potential is also a possibility, but let's see how Arsenal line up in the Champions League, because I think rotation will happen in certain areas, and it would not surprise me at all to see one of Lewis Skelly or Ben White start against Olympiacos or West Ham, so I think that is always in the back of my mind, but Gabriel should be safe, hopefully, on both occasions. In the midfield, though, I've got this sort of setup with 4 options in Semenyo, Reinders, Bruno Fernandes, and Ndai. I'm quite bullish on the majority of them. I still think Fernandes is a good option, but with Phil Foden, I just see him as an even better choice for Game Week 7. Antoine Semenyo, of course, is facing Fulham. He has a decent record against them, and he got the assists and goal contributions last season against Fulham. Ndai is facing Crystal Palace, so I've got a bit of a clash between him and Lacroix, and that's why ideally I would have yet another midfielder or forward and then benching Lacroix, or maybe Ndai in this case. That is also a possibility. But Fernandes facing Sunderland, he could still get a jammy penalty and score it this time round. He's got DEFCON potential at 9 million, though that simply isn't good enough. I understand that. He needs to offer more in terms of open play threat with the goals and assists, but he'll still be one of the highest scoring midfielders by the end of the season. It's just a really bad moment for him and Man United, and missing those 2 penalties has really swung things in terms of our perceptions on Bruno Fernandes and also their results and maybe his confidence as well. In the case of Rangers, I just don't know when he's going to return. It's very difficult to predict, but facing Brentford away, there is a chance. My ideal Man City midfielder and even player this week is Phil Foden. I can't stress that enough. I'm really bullish that he's going to return this week, and it might make me regret not going for him for this upcoming deadline and also last week when I had the chance. But up front, I have no regrets or debate about Erling Haaland, and even Joao Pedro is still a hold in most situations. But for those that want to go differential, selling him to Jared Bowen is a great choice in Game Week 8. The only problem is Chelsea have a nice fixture swing coming up very soon, just like West Ham, and both Joao Pedro and Bowen, facing 2 of the best teams in the league, are still capable of getting a massive return in Game Week 7, and Haaland will be the most captain player against Brentford away. He got an assist last season, I believe, or in one of his visits to the GTEC Community Stadium. He has a decent record against Brentford overall, not as good as Phil Foden's, but this will be the time where I think he will score for the first time in that particular stadium and add to his goal tally, which is already monstrous. On my bench, I've got Robert Sanchez facing Liverpool at home. That is still a debate between him and Dubravka, and ultimately my favourite goalkeeper long-term would be David Raya. I'm also quite interested in Nick Pope. I think Newcastle will keep plenty of clean sheets despite their league position. They're 15th in the table. They're still quite solid defensively, and we're a bit unlucky against Arsenal from that perspective. I think Arsenal deserve to win, but Newcastle showed a lot of resilience, and they're always so tough to break down, especially at St James's Park. Gakpo is first on my bench against Chelsea, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him benched again. Chris Wood is second on my bench as things stand, but moving him to Voltemada would shift things a little bit. I would start the German over either Lacroix or Ndai potentially, and even Reinders isn't completely safe from the benching dilemmas, and the alternative is doing Fernandes to Phil Foden, but that doesn't change much in terms of benching Lacroix and Ndai because they would still likely be in that starting 11. Maybe taking a -4 hit for both of those transfers I discussed in that transfer plan sections could be the way to go, and then wildcard in Game Week 8 and bring in more long-term options like Jared Bowen up front, for example, a second or third Arsenal player. But I think West Ham will be a bit more difficult for the Gunners than it would have been under Graham Potter. That is certainly something that has crossed my mind over the past week. Now, with the captaincy, I'm going with Erling Haaland. If I had Phil Foden, I would seriously consider putting the armband on him because of his record against Brentford. He has decent form overall. I know he was disappointing in the last 2 Premier League matches, but I think he's due a return in this competition. But his stats pale in comparison to Erling Haaland, who has the highest XG of any player. He's getting multiple big chances per game. In fact, compared to Salah, he has over 6 times the amount of big chances compared to the Egyptian, and Semenyo is a solid vice-captaincy shout, and with the triple captaincy last week, Semenyo was also my vice. I have that faith in him to get a return, of course, if needed, but Erling Haaland will play against Brentford, and I'm very confident in his ability. He is the best player in FPL right now. I'm happy to have made that switch from Salah to Haaland just about at the right time. It could have been done a little bit earlier, arguably, and he did return against Arsenal when people were very off-put by the fixture. Before I go to FPL.team and the clean sheet odds, let's discuss the expected points according to Fantasy Football Hub, and Dubravka is still slightly lower than Robert Sanchez with 3.2 compared to Sanchez's 3.3. Pedro Porro is quite low at 3.7, but I keep seeing like predicted lineups against Bodo Glimt and now for the weekend suggesting that Porro could be benched. I think Udogie is the one that was clearly going to be rested against Bodo Glimt in the Champions League. I discussed this in my UCL Fantasy videos, and Porro is still first choice. He will start this weekend. I'm very confident about that, but long term, I do see him as a sell, and Spurs aren't the most reliable defensively, despite their solid start to the season. But I'm very happy with Lacroix. He could stay on a wild card. The same definitely goes for Gabriel. But Ezri Konsa is going to be a sell. He has 4.3 expected points. Hopefully I can get one clean sheet out of this guy before I sell him. Lacroix has 4.4 and Gabriel has 5.8, which is monstrous for a centre-back. Antoine Semenyo is quite consistent, always offering around 5.8 to 6 expected points, and his actual points are even higher per game. Reinders has 4.5. Bruno Fernandes offers 6.5, so the algorithm still backs him very heavily, and Ndai has 4.9. Erling Haaland's the highest of any of my players with 6.9, and Joao Pedro offers 5.1 despite facing the Premier League champions. And on my bench, Gakpo has 3.2. That could rise a little bit, to be fair, after a decent performance against Galatasaray, and Chris Wood has 4.1. Of course, my suspended player, Reinildo Mandava, has 0.0, and that is it when it comes to expected points. I'd much rather get even more points on the board when it comes to FPL by the end of the week. Then it's an international break, of course, where there'll still be content headed your way for FPL and UCL Fantasy. But first off, let me show you a preview of Game Week 8 with a -4 hit, no wildcard, and some differential players in the midfield and forward line. My goalkeeper situation isn't great, but Sanchez facing Nottingham Forest away and Dubravka at home to Leeds is quite decent, and it does lead to a dilemma in terms of my team selection for Game Week 8. Pedro facing Aston Villa at home, he would be the preference over Konsa in that same fixture. Lacroix and Sarr facing Bournemouth at home, that could be my differential route, and having one of the most consistent performers with great underlying stats in Ismaila Sarr, who I bought all the way back in Game Week 3. He got injured, so that meant an immediate sell, of course, and a massive swing against Bruno Fernandes, which I'll try not to mention again. Gabriel, of course, is very good against Fulham away, and in general, he has scored at Craven Cottage before. In fact, on multiple occasions, he has done so in that stadium. And Bukayo Saka in the same fixture. He has a good record against Fulham in general, but the Gunners have struggled against them in recent seasons, and there was even that one campaign where they failed to beat them, and that was costly in terms of the Premier League title. Semenyo facing Crystal Palace away does result in a clash, but I'm very happy to own Semenyo and Ismaila Sarr for the long term. Rangers against Everton at home is decent, not my favourite pick, but I still think he offers good value. Jarrod Bowen facing Brentford at home is a great differential, and I'm quite surprised to see his price drop so much to 7.7 million. Even from Game Week 2, go back to my Transfers podcast and see what I talk about, because in the hold section, I talk about Jarrod Bowen. The same goes for this week as well. I think it will turn into a purchase very soon. Joao Pedro against Nottingham Forest away and Erling Haaland against Everton would be one of the standout captaincy options as usual. So I've actually got a good setup for Game Week 8 with just a -4 hit, which I don't necessarily need to take because I've got Fernandes away to Liverpool in my original team. Chris Wood is clearly a sell against Chelsea at home anyway. And the other move I could make in this sort of position might actually be a cheaper midfielder. For example, in Dye, who is facing Man City away. And the obvious one right now would be Cody Gakpo. The only downside to that is that they'd face Man United at home in Game Week 8. If Ruben Amorim is still the manager, I'd probably want to keep Gakpo for one more week, but that would mean no Bukayo Saka for a little while longer. And I could go without Saka against Fulham away, to be fair. I don't think it's the best fixture on paper, and it might be another low-scoring game, very cagey and quite similar to the match they had against Newcastle, but it's still a very good sort of set of ideas and also squad structure overall. There are some weaknesses. The goalkeepers aren't still great, especially long term. Pedro Porro is sellable, and a few other options here and there might not be the best on paper like Reinders, but I think that can perform to a very high level in Game Week 8, assuming we get no injuries and suspensions over the international break and also after this weekend. And we can always plan. Things look amazing up until Game Week 38, then something happens. You've got to adapt with the news and make sure you're well prepared, and you can change things up a little bit with your chip strategy or your transfers to make sure you're not left behind in FPL. Stay tuned for today's double upload with the best wildcard squad. I'll be discussing the top 10 captaincy options in that particular podcast, and it'll have updated information after the Champions League matches on Wednesday. Arsenal are top of the clean sheet odds facing West Ham at home with a 57% probability as referenced earlier in this video. Aston Villa are second, and I'm just hoping somehow for Konsa to get one return before I sell him facing Burnley at home. Man United are somehow third facing an informed Sunderland side who are in the top 5 of the Premier League table. Newcastle are fourth, and I would personally have them higher ranked in terms of the clean sheet odds this week facing Nottingham Forest, but a lot depends on how they line up against Union Saint-Gilloise and the rotation that happens there from Eddie Howe. And Bournemouth are fifth facing Fulham at home, and I think they could also keep a clean sheet this weekend in the early kickoff, so to speak, on Friday night. Man City are sixth facing Brentford away, and in last place is West Ham with a 9% chance against Arsenal away. But in the last 2 visits to the Emirates, they have kept clean sheets and gotten some very impressive results, to say the least. Let's see if they can do that this weekend, and let me know your predictions down the comment section below. Do you agree with the clean sheet odds, and who are your favourite captaincy options for Game Week 7? Would you recommend Saka or Gyökeres in terms of covering the Arsenal attack? I discussed this in my Transfers podcast, and maybe you want to go a bit against the grain and not go for 2 or 3 Arsenal players and have the likes of Bowen in your setup from Game Week 7, and there are definitely different ways of playing FPL to gain an advantage over your mini league rivals and also in the standings overall. And with this video and across all of my FPL content, you'll get so many ideas in terms of the best chip strategy, ways to approach this season, and I think the wildcard in Game Week 8 could still be very useful for many managers. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content for both FPL and UCL Fantasy. After the international break, there'll be a lot more content headed your way with the live streams and videos throughout the entire season, so you're well prepared for every single deadline. Let's close in on 37,000 subscribers and get this video to over 150 likes. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair access to my videos, priority reply to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Friday for an early deadline stream, and this weekend the plan is to do a reaction stream on the Saturday. There'll be a little break from content, but as soon as I'm back, there'll be a lot more FPL and UCL Fantasy videos headed your way.